Okay, there we go.
Good.
Yes, we're live. We're good.
Is there anybody on?
There is no one on at the moment.
Why don't we wait a couple minutes? So did the link just open up? All right.
No, the link would have been, we have someone on now, so.
Okay.
It's probably our joiner.
Okay,
The
so
link
if
would have
anyone's
been,
just joining us, we had some trouble getting the meeting live. We are now live. We've done roll call and the pledge of allegiance. We're about to do comments from the public on agenda items. There's no public in attendance, but I'll read it anyway in case anyone online wants to comment. As a reminder for those members of the public in attendance, this is one of two opportunities afforded members of the public to comment on or inquire about agenda items. Members of the public will also have an opportunity at the end of the evening's agenda to comment on matters not formally noted on the agenda. There's nobody in person. Does our person online have anything?
nope, no comments yet.
Anything? And no emails came through?
No, I will double check it before the end of the meeting too.
All right, so that takes us to business matters, action items. Should we read the items first or should we have a general discussion? Thing.
So we have the mechanical, the roofing, and then the site work. So I think we probably should go through each one at a time
Okay.
and then have discussion based on each one individually.
Okay. Okay, then can I get a resolution on item A, mechanical construction contract number 3, bid acceptance?
Be resolved that with respect to the mechanical construction, and I apologize, I'm on my computer, no glasses, so. With respect to the mechanical construction contract for the Menands Unit 3 School District for the May 16, 2023 voter authorized capital project SED project number 010615020001-011 on the recommendation of the district's architect, C.S. Arch, and the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby awards said contract to the lowest responsible bidder meeting the bid specifications. Was that
Deceber.
in the amount of $469,000. Be it further resolved that the aforementioned award is contingent upon the successful negotiation and execution of an owner/contractor agreement consistent with the bid documents here.
Second. Does anybody have any questions about the information that was shared?
I have a few, and they're probably just gonna roll over to the other ones. They're probably gonna be the same one. So CS Arch is acting as the general contractor for all the projects. Who's the general contractor gonna be for the projects?
The general, well, there's
Who's overseeing the
Deceber.
Jezer's work?
Well,
We'll start there.
that's, why don't you go ahead and speak to that?
So that's a decision that the Board of Education will have to make. The scope of this project will not require a full-time clerk of the works, but it will be recommended as we move forward that we hire somebody part-time to act in that capacity, to oversee all of the work that occurs over the span of this project. We certainly could go with a full-time clerk of the works. It just, usually you used to hire somebody full-time for the level of job that we, like our last project, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't go without oversight. So we would have to decide as a group, what we decide, what we need in that capacity, how many hours, when there are pieces of the project that could be more challenging, we would want to have that person here. They would take part in our weekly or bi-weekly meetings. And it's a pretty short project, so probably weekly meetings that we have with all of the contractors, just to ensure that, it moves as it should. So that piece hasn't been awarded yet.
Okay.
That is something that we will make a
And
decision.
there will be several different options that the board will bring to the board once we get a little bit further in, whether it be CS Arch, because it's an extension of their contract administration. It's not necessarily the clerk of the works, but we pay a little bit more and they'd be here to make sure when they are anyway.
Right.
But they would
Project
give
manager.
it, yeah, they would do just an increased level of that. They also, he knows, and I know a couple of people that have retired that could possibly do it on a per diem, they could be our employee or whatever, but those are things we're trying to go through right now. But as Jen spoke, this project is very limited in the pieces of it. There's roofing, there's paving, and there is a little bit of HVAC work. It does not, in my opinion, warrant a full-time clerk of the works. I think that would be very costly for something that isn't necessarily warranted with the limited.
So that's a contract thing? After the contract is,
Yeah, that would be something that we would decide on after we're gonna do the project anyways, how we want to oversee it through general, whether it's CSR or a different person, that would be somebody that we would have on site and ready to go prior to the project starting, and something that we would enter into that person, if it was a person, or there would be an amendment to the CSR contract as well, if they were gonna do it.
okay.
Did you have other questions about this one?
I do not.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, then we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution carries. That bid is awarded. Takes us to the roofing contract. Item B, could I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that with respect to the roofing construction contract for the Menands Union Free School District for the May 16, 2023 voter authorized capital project, SED project number 010615020001-011. Upon the recommendation of the district's architect, CS Arch, and superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby awards said base contract at alternate RC01 to the lowest responsible bidder meeting the bid specifications, Greenwood Industries Incorporated, in the amount of $1,273,000. Be it further resolved that the aforementioned award is contingent upon the successful negotiation and execution of an owner-contractor agreement consistent with the bid documents herein.
Are there any questions about this?
The same apply on my end, so.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That takes us to item C, site work contract bid acceptance. Why don't we get the resolution and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Can I get a resolution, please?
Be it resolved that with respect to the site work contract for the Menands Union Free School District for the May 16, 2023 voter authorized capital project, SED project number 010615020001-011, upon the recommendation of the district's architect, CS Arch, and the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby awards said base contract in alternate SC-01 to the lowest responsible bidder meeting the bid specifications, Peter, Louisi, and Rose Contracting, Inc., in the amount of $404,900. Be it further resolved that the aforementioned award is contingent upon the successful negotiation and execution of an owner-contractor agreement consistent with the bid documents herein.
Second.
Okay. So we had some discussion earlier today. There was, I let everybody know that there was, this company had a contract with the Village of Menands. I talked to Don, he said it might have been 10 years ago. He said it was before he was clerk. So it was a number of years ago. There were some issues. The work that they didn't last that long. We talked to some people from the village. They said there was probably issues with the scoping of the project. The engineer, the village's engineer, had scoped it as a resurfacing and not as a tear up and lay new underlayment and things like that. So it didn't last that long. There were also some issues with dust mitigation. It never rose to the level of legal action or contract issues. But there were some concerns within the village. Knowing that, we reached out, well, maybe I'll let Jen take over now about, and she talked to Scott a little bit about our vetting process, and how we've talked a little bit more with, some people that have done more recent work with the company, to make sure that we were covering our bases, so that we didn't have the same issues.
So-
But we are stripping it and then relaying, right?
So.
Yes and no.
Yes and no, so let me start there. So the project that went to state ed, is really in 3 sections. We have the upper section where the teachers park, right, like across where the trees were. We have the road coming in, and then we have the drive that goes along back down to the driveway, to the back parking lot. So the upper lot and the driveway in will be a full depth removal and a replacement. They'll go down the full 18 inches, it'll be completely ripped out and replaced. And this road coming in is also gonna be widened a little bit. So that is that piece. The alternate was this road that goes along back down to the lower lot. It's not in great shape, it's about 12 years old, and it needs some sort of repair work. When the project was initially planned, under Dr. Long and CSR and with Joanne, really kind of looking at what can we afford to do. The decision was made to mill and resurface this section, but it was made for a couple of reasons. One being, the scope of work that we were doing wouldn't put us into that SWIFT category, where there was a lot more monitoring and disturbance of the ecosystems that we had to be aware of, which comes with a cost. But then the second piece was, we don't know what our future building project will look like. Doing a full depth removal and a replacement of all of this, I don't know what this back parking lot is gonna look like if we decide to come out, what those kinds of things are. So to invest that level of money just didn't seem to make sense at the time. So the alternative was, we can't say it doesn't need to be repaired, if we able to repair. So this will get us, it'll buy us some time, and then we can make a decision based on future projects. The last thing we want to do is spend money to then tear it out. So that's what we're looking at for all 3 pieces. I share that because a surfacing, milling and resurfacing isn't the same as a full depth removal. It's not gonna have the same life, it's not gonna have the same impact, and that is just infiltrating, that's what we are doing, though. That is the proposed project. So when I reached out to Scott, I said, okay, can you tell me a little bit about your vetting process? What does that look like? So there's 2 pieces of the project that they vet: lowest bidder, responsible bidder. Lowest bidder, there's 2 pieces. They work with Weston and Sampson, and they go through and make sure that the bid is complete and that it isn't missing any pieces. And I apologize, I want to pull up my notes. They have the financial and the experience and the capacity to complete the work. So the financial and the experience capacity, every bidder that we had to submit that paperwork. All bidders, that paperwork was satisfactory, including Louise. Then when they looked at the cost, the scope, and the completeness of the bid, it passed on that front as well. The bid that they submitted met both of those requirements under CSR and under Weston and Sampson. Weston and Sampson is an engineering firm. Then the next step becomes a responsible bidder. And that process is done through essentially what I would liken it to what you mean, like reference checks. They reach out to architects that have worked with them, they reach out to previous clients, direct knowledge that they may have working with them. And what they're looking for, are there any tangible, factual, and strong evidence that the company has not been successful? And they typically look at things that would result in litigation, Department of Labor violations, and also like not being able to successfully complete the project. So through that piece and through that vetting process, they go ahead and did that and determined that Louise at that point was a responsible bidder. So that is kind of the first piece that Scott does. Then I reached out to Frank Brill, who was our school attorney, and presented him with my questions. This is what we have, and I didn't share the vetting process. I didn't want to taint that this was that this person had already been vetted. I said, can we talk a little bit about what are our options when it comes to the bidding process? And actually, I apologize because I did share with Mr. Burrell what I had learned from Scott, because I also reached out to our mayor and said, just simply, can you tell me a little bit about your experience working with, a particular company? And then he had shared that while there were some challenges, that the work was really maybe not the scope of the work that should have been done. So through that conversation, I then reached out to Frank Burrell. When I spoke with Frank Burrell, our school attorney, I shared with him what Scott had shared, what the mayor had shared, and I said, can you talk to me a little bit about what our options are? Because there is some hesitation. There's hesitation given some of the direct experiences from years back that were a result of work that was done. And he had shared that we have what we call discretion as a municipality. But what that means is that we have discretion to not accept necessarily the lowest bidder, but there's a high bar in order to do that. In order to do that, they either have to, it comes down to cost and being a responsible bidder. And the idea of you'd have to disqualify your lowest bidder. And in order to do that, we would have to be able to defend that if we did in fact reject that bid and went with a different bid. In doing that, he said that we have to examine and can only consider strong factual and tangible evidence that they performed poorly on a similar contract. And he said that usually comes in the form of litigation, defaulting, or a Department of Labor violation. And through the vetting process and through our conversations locally, it didn't appear that we had that piece to move forward with a disqualification. The second piece that we did talk a little bit about was, okay, so then what are the options? What options does this Board of Education have this evening? And essentially there's three. One, you can reject all bids and go back out and just say, you know what, we're not happy with the bids we received. We're going to reject all of our bids across the board. We want to go back out and rebid. Frank said that's absolutely within the right of the Board of Education. The one piece that I will caution you around is our bid prices are only good for 45 days. So the prices that we essentially received would not necessarily be guaranteed going back out again. But then the secondary piece is, in some instances, the cat's out of the bag, right? Like the bids that we read aloud, that information is out there. So there's some information about their kind of your starting point, and it really usually will result in higher bids. The second option could be to reject the lowest company and pursue the second lowest bidder. That would begin with our school attorneys. They would have to go through the process to see if there was a disqualification for the first bidder. Through that process, Frank didn't have a sense of how long that process takes, but again, I would say we have the bids are good for 45 days. So if that should go outside of that 45 days, we would essentially be looking at potentially rebidding, because nobody would have to stick with, if I speak incorrectly, Joanne, please let me know. Because they don't necessarily have to stick with the prices that they originally gave us. But there is a process for them to look through and ensure that we have a responsible bidder. So make sure I'm sharing all the pieces. And also, if we do that and we go to the second lowest bidder, the original bidder has the ability and right to come and ask, why did you reject me? And then present evidence to support that, if he or she wanted to do that. And both of these scenarios can result in us having to go to the second lowest bidder, pull back our bid, and be required to go with the first bidder, which in that situation can create a not great start to the working relationship if you do that. Is it an option? Absolutely. I would say, like, I would just say be sure, as far as the board goes. And then the last piece is that we can go ahead and we can award the bids as they are. That is really what I had learned from those three conversations. Mrs. Moran, is there anything that you would add to that based on your experience, your work through this, or any of the conversations you've had at this point?
The only thing I would add, I think it's pertinent, is that we've done the scope of the paving project, both coming in the driveway and up here. When you go down and do a full depth replacement all the way down, that makes it aidable. When you do, so they'll look at how much site work we had or what's our allowance for incidental work. And that's why all that's done that way, so it's aidable. And it's like, it's a good thing to do that with paving. Now, the back piece wouldn't be, but it's small enough, and it was one of those things that we didn't know if we'd have enough money to do anyway. So to mill it and do it, it falls within that percentage of incidental allowance.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that what we were calling the incidental, like if we have extra money, we're gonna do that?
Well, that was what they do as an an alternate, so
Yeah.
we bid that as an
Alternate,
alternate, in
that's
case
what
there
it
wasn't enough money, you could pick and choose what pieces you do, you're familiar with that. And, so that's the only thing I would add, that up here and coming in is gonna be,
So the different.
But anyway, that back road is not used that much, right?
no, it isn't, but it certainly is rough on the bikes and the cars, and the feet, I would tell you. It's rough on everybody, but I didn't hear what you said.
It's a different rate than building aid, correct?
Yes, but it's still aidable, and that's what makes it important.
Definitely.
So that's when we're looking at the attachment for bids, that's the $64,000 is the
Yes.
billing and.
Mhm.
Okay, so with that information shared, does anyone have any questions or comments? Sorry, Bill does.
Can I have one more piece just
Go
because
ahead.
you're asking that
And
question?
then- yeah.
The grant money from DASNY, that would offset the base bid. We cannot use the DASNY grant for this back piece. They will not support anything that does not go down to the base. So that grant, when